discrimination of people and communities. Next slide. So the seventh proposal advocates for prevention to be in line with the public health approach. Countries should provide drug demand prevention that is accessible and affordable for all individuals everywhere, and intertwined with provisions within a logic of a continuum of care. Integrating a gender perspective in prevention is as important as incorporating it into treatment, rehabilitation, social integration, recovery, and harm reduction. Additionally, public health services must also be complemented by improved services and agencies from education, justice, governmental, societal, institutional, and community. Drug policies cannot be disconnected from issues of gender-based violence, sexism, discrimination. Neither can it be separated from wider policies. All of these facets are interconnected and each plays a key role in improving the health, well-being, future, and lives of people by protecting and upholding their rights. So incorporating a gender perspective in drug use is not just about creating more inclusive programs. It is about ensuring that programs are effective, sustainable, and reach the individuals who need them the most. By considering how gender affects the causes and consequences of drug use, we can create prevention strategies that are more supportive of all individuals regardless of their gender. So moving forward, I personally believe that in order to truly progress with prevention, we need to move from the concept of a gender binary towards a gender spectrum, to be more inclusive and representative, to genuinely address the needs of all people in our society. This involves recognizing that gender exists on a continuum that includes a wide range of identities and expressions. The traditional binary model has often excluded or marginalized those who do not fit into these two categories. And by embracing a gender spectrum, we acknowledge that gender is fluid, diverse, and deeply personal. This shift encourages a more inclusive, equitable understanding of gender, allowing people to express themselves authentically without being confined by rigid categories. It also promotes greater respect for the complexity and individuality of human experiences, fostering a society that values diversity and supports all gender identities. Next slide. Next slide. So it's imperative to continue to progress and adapt our ideas of gender, mental health, addictions, and drugs to reflect our constantly changing society. Civil society plays a crucial role in advocating for the rights of people. However, member states also have an obligation to protect and uphold the rights of their people. Everyone has the right to life, to health, to love, and to be free from all forms of violence, harm, and discrimination. Together, we must recognize that all identities are meaningful and each and every person is valuable and an important member to our society. Next slide. So I would like to end my presentation with one of the most well-known whakapōki, which is a Maori proverb, as I'm in New Zealand, and it's Te aha te mea nui o te ao, what is the most important thing in the world. Next slide, please. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is people, it is people, it is people. Thank you.
Very much, Tanya, for this insightful presentation. Thank you very much. So moving forward, we have Renato Bocaterra, an executive manager with over 25 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Renato currently serves as the general director of Dianova Italia, having led numerous organizations in the healthcare, social healthcare, and research sectors. He's an expert in strategic management, project development, and institutional relations, and has collaborated with various Italian universities and research institutions. Today, Renato will tell us about the importance of implementing gender perspective in residential settings, specifically in therapeutic communities. So, Renato, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Gisela for this invitation. I'm very pleased to present the Dianova Italy experience in integrating gender perspective through human rights lens in therapeutic communities. Dianova is the next, please. Dianova is an international network present in 4 continents with 20 partner organizations founded on value of commitment, solidarity, and tolerance. Dianova operates with the deep conviction that every person with appropriate support can find within themselves the necessary resources to achieve success in their personal development and social integration. Dianova Italy have 41 years of experience in the field of addiction and residential research. We have 5 therapeutic communities, 1 outpatient center, and 93 collaborators. Our approach is bio-psychosocial, and we employ in multidisciplinary teams. We currently have 166 places accredited with the Italian National Health Service. In 2024, we took charge of 362 users with an average of 24% of women in our free mix therapeutic community. It's crucial to emphasize the importance of therapeutic communities in the continuum of the care, as they offer diversific and personalized service for individuals in different stages of life. TC are cost-effective and evidence-based approach. In fact, in 2023 report by CREA Sanità, an important research institution in Italy, estimated that for every euro invested in TC, the state saved 4 euros. TC offer important social work, flexibly and person-centered approach. The next one. A fundamental aspect of our work is the integration of gender perspective in the treatment of the addiction. In Italy, only the 15% of people treated for addiction are women. Focus on an important gender disparity at the global level. The main barrier that women face accessing and maintaining treatment include the stigma, gender-based violence, lack of financial resources, fear of losing custody of children, lack of social support, and care system that often result in being androcentric. For this reason, we launched a campaign last November to raise awareness about the importance of addressing this barrier and improving access to care for women. Implementing a gender perspective in TC means working with both men and women in mixed group and group divided by gender. For women, it's crucial to focus on issues such as shame, stigma, double punishment, being a woman and drug addict, and the prevalence of gender-based violence and trauma in relation to addiction. Implementing trauma-informed and gender-sensitive care is essential for us. For men, it's important to address the construction of masculinity, substance use, and the relationship with women through the lens of privilege of gender. To implement the gender perspective, Dianova Italy promotes specific training on gender issues for every professional teams. The key action is represented by non-mixed group activities with a gender perspective, focused at addressing particular topic and situation, creating community and female solidarity, and a welcoming atmosphere. Furthermore, we consider fundamental and increased in the network collaboration for integrated care that take into account aspects such as violence, mental health, and child protection. We also focus on working with the children of people in treatment. Despite the progress, we face ongoing challenges. Among these, coexistence in mixed community. It's not so easy. The need for further professional training and awareness on gender-sensitive practice, the importance of addressing stigma and self-stigma, the need to improve therapeutic plans to respond to the high demand of women seeking recovery, simultaneously addressing issues relative to child custody. A crucial question we ask ourselves is how to address the need to integrate a gender perspective and a child right perspective in addiction treatment systems. In conclusion, we believe that implementing a gender perspective in therapeutic communities is essential to address the specific need of women in the setting of addiction treatment and to reduce gender barrier to access and maintenance of the treatment. This is not only a therapeutic and efficacious imperative, but also a matter of social justice and human rights. This is also a deontological and ethical dimension in all these actions. Adopting gender perspective lead to more inclusive and effective response to the challenge relative to the substance use. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renato. Thank you for emphasizing that when we integrate the gender perspective, it's not just a cost-effective matter, it's about social justice and the right things to do. So next we are going back to Corina, if this is possible.
Okay.
No surprise now.
That horrible thing that we saw before.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall I share my presentation or would you prefer to share it?
I think we can see you now. That's just one sec. Let me introduce Corina first. Well, I just introduced her before, but it's just for those. Corina is a consultant from the Pompidou Group, and she's presenting integrating gender and children's rights in services for family affected by drug use. So, Corina, we can hear you. Maybe you want to start? Or
Yes, of course. It's just that I can't share my presentation because someone is sharing already the screen. So if you could just stop sharing and then I will share mine.
Okay, so you stop sharing.
And if you want, I will start talking in the meantime, so we gain some seconds after that disruptive event. So, as I was saying, my presentation is part of the project Children Whose Parents Use Drugs of the Pompidou Group, which looks at children and parents in their own right and in their relationship. Between 2020 and 2024, we developed a vast amount of research, publishing 5 ISBN publications, which include practices from about 20 countries, the voices of women, the voices of children, and also more recently, and I think it will be published this year, we also worked with men who use substances and are fathers. So basically looking at the intersection of masculinity, parenthood, and substance use. So unfortunately, I still can't share my presentation, but if it's okay, I will just continue. Otherwise, we'll never get there. So, part of the aim of this Pompidou Group project is to make sure that gender and parenting is mainstreamed in drug policies and in social services working with families. What are some of the highlights of the project, some of the findings that I'm sure are shared by the other presenters and people who work with people who use, with the persons who use the substances? Well, first of all, usually, generally speaking, and of course some generalizations will be made because of time constraints, drug-related services and harm reduction services tend to focus on the individual. So the family tends to be overlooked, children in particular, as well as partners and grandparents that are also a very present element for people who use the substances. So there is an invisibilization of other people, and the individual tends not to be seen through a gender lens and not taken into account through their parenting roles either. Social services, on the other hand, may be uninformed about substance and substance dependence, and that can lead to the reproduction of stigmatizing language and attitudes. And the impacts of drug use on children and other family members is not always taken into account and addressed by services, which has implications, of course. Even if gender roles impact on the way people relate to substances and how our needs and strengths are met by services, gender is still not mainstreamed in services. And that happens for men, for women, for non-binary people, and so on. So basically what we try to do with this work is to visibilize how gender could and should be mainstreamed. We know that women who use substances face higher stigma and higher barriers to access services and are usually underserved. At the same time, there is a sort of ambivalence towards women who are mothers and use substances. They're more visibilized by services, but at the same time, there is a higher risk for stigma because they are not seen as fit for motherhood. And in the case of men, on the other hand, in this publication, we will be published this year with the participation of 94 men from 12 countries. They also call for the need to be more seen in their parenting role and to be more engaged by services. So it's also important to look more at the intersection between masculinity and fatherhood, because still it tends not to be seen by drug-related services. Men are not seen as gendered and not as parents, often because they are not there either. But the same happens with the social services. So even if there is more knowledge and awareness and research, also with people with lived experience, in order to visibilize the intersection of gender with the substance use and parenting, still there is a sort of silos approach from services and not necessarily always a gendered approach when working with parents and people in general. I would like to finish with the interventions of a father, a mother, and one of the children who participated in the Pompidou Group's studies. As you might imagine, with all these, research and participation of so many countries, so many people, many recommendations have been developed, and they are all available in the publications, which can all be downloaded for free. But I really wanted to bring in the voices of the people that generously participated in the project, and particularly to share the testimonies that indicate how a mother, a father, and a child are basically asking for the same thing. And that same thing is integrated services for families. So Elias, a father from Czech Republic, says, I think the help needs to be comprehensive, under one roof, that it really should be from a help type, like you have comprehensive child and family care, the legal help, but also with accompaniment, representation, that kind of reassurance of rights and responsibilities at the same time. Now, Alexis from Greece, and Gisela has heard me read these testimonies many times, but it's very effective. Alexis, 14 years old, said, teachers and services must be patient with the children. They must hear the voice of the child and the silence of the child. It helps to be supported in everything without the danger of losing your house and being in an institution. It helps if the child can have a quiet home, a therapist for the parents, a school that understands, and a network that supports with food, clean clothes, a clean house, quiet sleep, studying, going to school on time. And Eugenie from Switzerland said to us in the publication, We Are Warriors, people still believe too much that mothers who have drug dependence do not want to take care of their children. I would dream of a house where everything is together for these mothers, for the fathers too. I think there are outpatient ways of dealing with parents, and that would do much less harm, because there is no drug-addicted mother who wants to harm her child. I would just like to point out, to conclude, that in the research we did with fathers who use substances, we didn't find a single service where single fathers could be with their children, as opposed to what happens with mothers. There are still not many drug treatment residential centers where the women can live with their children, but at least they exist. For fathers, there was none, and there were 7 single dads who participated in the study. One of them, just one, was living alone with his 10 months baby in a therapeutic community in Cyprus. So basically, I think that this work gives us many tips on what kind of practices exist out there, what kind of recommendations and policy changes can be done, and that definitely, even if there's more and more awareness on the need to mainstream gender, there is still a lot of work to do. Well, thank you for your attention and for being part of the conversation.
Thank you very much, Corina. Thank you. So we are moving forward to our next speaker, Sara Snap, who holds a degree in political science from the University of Colorado, a master's in public policy from Harvard University, where she received a full scholarship. Sara is the director of Instituto RIA, a Mexican organization focused on research and advocacy for drug policy grounded in social justice and the implementation of harm reduction intervention. She is the author of the Drug Dictionary and an international advisor for Acción Técnica Social in Colombia. Sara also chairs the Youth Rights Council and holds the 4th legal injunction before the Supreme Court of Mexico for the right to cultivate cannabis. In her presentation, Sara will address the concept of comprehensive harm reduction with a gender-sensitive approach. Thank you, Sara. Over to you.
Thank you, first of all, to Dianova and to the rest of the panelists for having me here today. And I'm happy to speak about some of the work that we've been doing with women who use drugs in Mexico. So I wanted to talk about a few terms, I think just in the sense of how we speak about these issues. So having a gender intersectional perspective is really thinking about how gender intersects with other systems of oppression, whether that's racial, whether that's class, and how do we include women who use drugs, and an intersectional approach in the design and implementation of programs. Also from Latin America, how we talk about full spectrum harm reduction is really not just focused on consumption, but rather on the full production chain and how the harms of prohibition, how do we also reverse and not repeat and repair the harms of prohibition, which can include the criminalization of people, which can include abuse by authorities, which has oftentimes a much greater impact on people who use drugs than just the possible health harms they might perceive from using a substance. So this is something that's really being pushed for the last 10 years or so, beginning with Dianova in Mexico. And also one of the things that we do with trying to keep a gender perspective is how we use inclusive language. If we can speak in a different way, which happens to me in Spanish and more gendered languages, it happens a lot more than in English. But if we can make people feel as comfortable as possible, why not? It doesn't cost any of us anything. It means that one more person here feels like they're heard or seen. It's also, when we talk about a feminist perspective, it's how do we identify, understanding that the idea of feminism and feminist perspectives might be different culturally, and that there's lots of cultures and women who don't embrace this idea of feminist, many times because of cultural differences, and we get this a lot from the pueblos originarios, from indigenous groups in Mexico. But how to identify necessities to really exercise human rights, promote collective emancipation, and the development of personal autonomy. And then there's a term that's been being used a lot recently. It's called narco-feminism. And it's something that, at least from Latin America, and when I talk with colleagues in Latin America, it's very hard. It's a hard term for us to swallow because it's connecting us to drug trafficking. It's connecting us to a public enemy. It's connecting us to the other that is really something that's been built up into our social consciousness by government narratives, that those are bad. And so this idea of, if anything, we're trying to push apart the term and disintegrate the term narco and what that really means, because it's been used to justify human rights violations. So what could be, and it's a term that's been very pushed by certain groups, so what could be some of the alternatives so that we can find consensus, so we can find terms that work in all of our settings? Okay, the next one, please. So some of the things that in Instituto RIA, as I said, we do research and advocacy, and we also implement harm reduction interventions through our drug checking program, Check Out the Sustancia, where we're in festivals and also community settings. And we're the majority of our team in Instituto RIA, we're 5 women. And some of the things we feel like we almost never speak about. We almost never speak about drug use and how it impacts you when you're menstruating. We don't talk about drug use among people who are pregnant or lactating, except to say, don't do it, when it's a reality that many women will continue to use during these periods in their life. So what does the research tell us? What do we really know about studies? What we know is that many of those studies were carried out 20, 30 years ago among women of low resources and who were already unable to provide their children with all of the comprehensive care that they would have wanted to give to that child. And so there might be other risk factors that were taken into account much beyond that they also consumed cannabis or they also used other drugs during these times. And especially around, then how do we take the stories and really the knowledge? We talk about compartir saberes, how do we share knowledge across women and across people who are pregnant or lactating to be able to share those stories beyond a scientific study, which is very hard to get approved by governments. And we're only beginning to see those studies emerge in jurisdictions where, for example, cannabis use is legal, and so you can create control groups, such as the University of Washington, for example. We also almost never talk about how to incorporate daycares, play centers, or lactation rooms within health services offered to women who use drugs. We don't talk about how drug use might play a role in relieving maternity or other complex periods in the life of women, and how there might be benefits to some of that use. How mental health and the mental load of mothers can influence quality of life. And so how do we reduce that as a means of also lifting up protective mechanisms? We don't talk about, and I'm so glad that on this panel we're talking about it, how stigma and discrimination within the harm reduction and drug policy movement towards women who use drugs can also be present. And so how do we shut those down, and how do we have a conversation about what that means? Or that we expect if women are pregnant or lactating, that they're not going to participate actively in political life. No, and I brought my children to the CND every 2 years, like the first 2 years of their life, because they fly free. But it means what's the mental load that then that mother carries because she has her child outside, or she has to bring a friend, or you have to know all of those things for us to be able to continue on our professional growth. The next one. So we have a great differentiated impacts of women on women who use drugs. In Mexico, there are 3 times fewer free treatment centers for women than for men. Services don't take into account the roles of mothers and caretakers. And there's very little articulation or none between sexual health and drug services when we find great intersection between these 2 areas. Sexual violence in residential centers is a recurring practice, and there are few supervision mechanisms. Teen women are more likely to enter residential treatment centers, but with that comes new dynamics of violence and treatment models that don't adjust to the life cycle of women, and they can be counterproductive if they do face some sort of violence or some sort of abuse. The illegality of consumption and possession of psychoactive substances often obligate women to hide their consumption. And this is where then we see women are afraid of losing their children. They're afraid of being kicked out of their homes if they're in social housing. The next one, please. And so we were seeing all of this, and we were asked by the National Institute of Women in Mexico to do a diagnostic and then create a model of care, which is some of the work that we do on building in models of care around harm reduction for people who use drugs, for men, women, people who use fentanyl, who use methamphetamine, which is the drug that's most increasing in Mexico. And so we did a survey with 598 women, obviously taking into account this was an online survey, so that people who don't have access to internet aren't able to respond. All of those, possibilities. 30 of the 32 states in Mexico were represented in the survey. As we can see, the majority of them were between 24 and 29 years old, then 30 to 35. 44% were from Mexico City, 10% from the state of Mexico, and 6.4% from Aguascalientes. 95% were born in Mexico, that means 5% were immigrant women, 81% were cisgender women, the median age was 31. 45% who responded works, 12% worked and studied, and 9% studied. And 22% were the principal support or caregiver of other people. So women are taking on these extra roles of caregiving. The next one, please. And so this diagnostic was also about just drug use in general. It didn't necessarily mean that you had to have sought treatment out. It was, tell us about your experiences, tell us what you've been, how you've been experiencing this in your life. 157 of the women said that they did identify problematic use in the last year. Of those, only 29 sought help for problematic use. 128 did not seek help. And 118 didn't seek help, but said they would have if it didn't mean they had to abstain completely from using. So this means that harm reduction in the full spectrum and in the sense of that it does not require, and harm reduction never requires a person to change, but rather offers them options so that they can make choices about how they want to live their life, meets the people where they're at. They would have sought treatment if it didn't come conditioned. And this is important because in Mexico, there's many treatment centers, some of the only regulated treatment centers. If you go in and you have a relapse, you aren't allowed to go back. But then how do I continue? This is a natural part. How many times does somebody have to quit smoking to successfully quit smoking? 8, 9, 15 times, and they keep trying. And so most people find help for their problematic use in themselves, in their redes de apoyo, in their networks. And so 9% were attended in 9 of the 29 that sought help were attended in public health services, 19 in private health services, which also means that those are folks who have resources that it allows them to seek in public health in private services. And 1 was attended in a civil society organization. 85% of the women who responded this question, which was 514, did not inform health workers in hospitals or clinics about their use. There is no trust between health services and women who use drugs, especially if you are a caretaker and you think this might result in you losing your children or losing what freedom, you might be arrested. And so if we can't allow for treatment or for support that also includes not abstaining from use and that allows you to continue with your life, then we're not going to go to traditional health services. The next one, please. We can go to the next one. Oh, I had actually removed this, but anyway, it's great. This is our drug checking service where we have a focus on women and young people, in people who are part of the diverse community, and we have a team that allows us to have open conversations. So we, for example, have done interventions with women who exercise sex work, teaching them how to use fentanyl test strips, or in parties of men who have sex with men. The next one, please. So some of the learnings, and this one I think it closes, is really about how we identify power relationships that are established in consumption spaces or supply of substances. So oftentimes women depend on men or their partners in order to supply them with the substance that they might want to choose. And so that person also decides how much or when. And this is something that we need to be able to figure out how that shifts. We need adequate and specific information on the effects of substances on women's bodies, and also in women's bodies when they're in these different forms of menstruation, menopause. You know, I'm talking to colleagues here and who are passing through that, and we don't talk enough about it. I mean, in general, we don't talk enough about it, and then also when you add in drug use, we don't talk about it at all. It's necessary to normalize the attention to consumption by women who are mothers in health institutions, not as a situation that might result in the loss of custody of your children or the loss of freedom. We have to eliminate sexual violence that could happen during consumption, and this is a big conversation we have in schools and in universities around consent, and a lot around alcohol use and consent. Alternative daycare must be developed for women who come with caregivers. In Mexico City, there's these centros colibri, which are inside utopias, which are these large public spaces that have lots of different services provided. And the centros colibri have a harm reduction focus, but then also they have daycare on site or gyms so that the kids can go be doing exercise. And the women have access to health services, including mental health services. This might be the first time in their life that a woman is offered psychological care. Inpatient centers are not compatible with the care work that women carry. It's not compatible with what they do in their families or with their children, or imagine a grandmother who might be using pills, and they don't have a place to go. Community and outpatient alternatives must be supported without seeking abstinence only. We must foment self and collective care for women who use drugs. This is one of the main pillars of Instituto RIA, of how we really work on building collective care. The team should reflect the population we want to reach. So beyond peers, people who use drugs with technical knowledge, and peers should not be treated as peers, as less than, but rather they have even a greater wealth of knowledge. And honestly, I mean, at this point, there are so many people in the world who are using drugs and who are technical, professional people who can then provide these services. And we understand, and even the United Nations says, you know, the majority of people who use drugs in the world, 87%, you do so without creating a problematic use in their personal or private life. That means that there are a lot of people who can be designing, implementing, and working in drug policy and treatment, and prevention and harm reduction and education without needing to necessarily be stigmatized for their use. And the end, which is something that in Instituto RIA and also with ATS we work on greatly, is around legal regulation with a social justice focus, because we also believe that it would democratize access, it would eliminate discriminatory practices and reduce stigma, in addition to increasing information available to historically vulnerable communities. This is part of guaranteeing human rights and building peace, at least in our countries, where a decrim model would not be sufficient, because we do have to also be talking about production. We have to talk about the women who work in coca cultivations, who are part of groups that are producing. And so how do we build in also, derechos laborales, working rights? How do we build in the rights that all of these folks would need, and especially to differentiate impacts on women? I think that's it. Thank you.
Very much, Sarah. Thanks so much for the presentation. So finally, we are honored to have Dianova, our running activist and health program expert with an MA in cultural and social psychology. Since 2017, has served as the executive director of the Eurasian Harm Reduction Association, based in Lithuania, which unites 284 organizations and activists across 28 countries in Central, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Her work focuses on advocating for a progressive human rights-based drug policy, securing sustainable funding, and improving the quality of harm reduction services tailored to the needs of people who use drugs. In December, actually last December, Ghana was elected chair of the European Union Civil Society Forum on Drugs. She is also a member of the Women of Well Found steering group and the Steering Group and the Eurasian Coalition for Health, Rights, Gender, and Sexual Diversity. Ghana will share with us civil society recommendations on this important topic today. So thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to congratulate Dianova for organizing such full and balanced event. And that's what we cherish in Civil Society Forum on Drugs, actually, because that's coming from prevention, treatment, rehabilitation, palliative care, and harm reduction all together. We have some common values to share, and that's why we are united. And Civil Society Forum on Drugs is the formal expert group to the European Commission, and we are uniting more than 40 members from civil society all over the Europe, with the variety of stances in the field, but with the one objective to make drug policy in Europe more participatory and more effective. And civil society participation and engagement, that's the key point for us and the key message we are delivering everywhere. And I'm very happy that for the gender perspective in the EU drug policy, we do have the specific paper in the material toolkit, which Dianova developed for this side event. There will be all of the specific paper contributions from EU Civil Society Forum on Drugs on the gender, and I will just emphasize a couple of issues which actually summarize what have been already said here in the panel. For us, we believe that the gender-sensitive drug policy, it's the key, and they need to remove barriers to drug services and enhance policy effectiveness for women, men, and gender non-conforming people, wherever revolutionary it could sound nowadays. But that's our beliefs, and that EU leads internationally in advocating for gender-sensitive drug policies, and that's also important role of European Union to bring these values globally as well, and in these forums like CND. We need to hear more about this from EU. We as a CSFD identify gender as a key issue for EU drug policy, and it should be integrated and mainstreamed into all the policies. So we could not say gender is one part of the services, like gender sensitive services, and that's it. But the gender perspective need to be mainstreamed everywhere and in all the policies. And we know that in comparison between the nowadays acting EU strategy 2021-2025, it's much more gender oriented, and we have several mentioning and several paragraphs specifically on gender sensitive approaches in comparison with previous. But now we have more challenges ahead, because it's Civil Society Forum on Drugs during the 2025 will have the big challenge to include the gender language and gender perspective, as well as the perspective of comprehensive approach and community and civil society participation into the new EU drug strategy plan. And that will not be easy, especially taking the political context. But that's our agenda, and that's why we existed as a civil society forum on drugs. So key recommendations, and they are here where already being, it's mainstreaming gender across all policy areas and all the continuum of services and balanced services, develop trauma-informed and gender-sensitive interventions, and this trauma-informed referral to the mental health needs which any women have in prevention or treatment and harm reduction. So that's actually one of the priority we need to focus on. Addressing institutional violence, including gender-based violence by law enforcement, and that's rather heavy issues for a lot of regions. Not only my region is Eastern Europe and Central Asia, but for a lot of regions in Europe. Expand women and gender non-conforming people only services, specific comforting services, strengthen training for practitioners and civil society on gender transforming services, means all the continuum of services from prevention to rehabilitation, and combat stigma and discrimination, to improve service access, reinforce intersectionality, considering multiple vulnerabilities of LGBT people, sex workers, people living with different diseases, with HIV, and with different identities, national identities, religious identities. That's rather important part of intersectionality we need to take into account. Include LGBTQI plus community in policy design connected with the drug use, and that's important story. I have plenty of stories from my region. Address the need of children whose parents use drugs, and that's actually already was addressed. Support and invest in peer-led interventions. Again, addressed, I'm summarizing, and ensure gender disaggregated data collection for policy monitoring and evaluation. It's strange that we need to advocate still for this, but plenty of data have no disaggregation and some specific on intersecting identities. So in time of crisis, which we face now, women face much more risks than other populations like men, because they are caretakers, they are responsible for the whole family, and the crisis and economical crisis and political crisis, social crisis, always like first hit women. So gender-based violence, mental health struggles, poverty, lack of essential health care, that's what we are facing in the moment of war, crisis, uncertainty, security crises, which we are now facing in the world. And women who use drugs, especially vulnerable because they are stigmatized and criminalized, and they are often denied care. So civil society, as we are, from the different angles, stands united to ensure gender-sensitive, human rights-based drug policies that provide access to comprehensive prevention care, harm reduction treatment, rehab, and palliative care, ensuring protection and dignity for all. Hopefully that we will survive and we will continue this work. That's from me, because that's for us all. We all understand that financially we now are very unprotected as a civil society, but that's what I believe personally, that we need to keep being solidar, even if we will become weaker altogether. This feeling of solidarity and women's sisterhood, that's something which will keep us going and not to lose what we gained previous years in gender sensitivity and gender transforming, even I would say gender transforming approaches. Thank you.
Thank you for all our speakers. We are running out of time, but maybe we can take a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes from here, because we have half hour to the next segment, to open the floor to the audience. If you have some questions, comments, thoughts, someone want to share something? Okay, maybe we can keep the conversation outside. So thank you very much again for being with us today, and let's keep together against all this backlash and advocate to be implemented. Thank you. I know.